tame us. Don't give them a reason to take us. Time is now, no time to wait up. Keep it raw, uncut, sit down.
Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of the Raw Uncut podcast. I'm your host, Rells. Make sure you guys go follow, like, and subscribe to YouTube and Twitch channels. That's 2920 TV. Make sure you go follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. That's Mr_2920. So I'm here with a guest I've been trying to get forever, but
yes, sir.
Our friendship brotherhood runs deep. Like, we've known each other since we were like 6. It's crazy when you think about that, yo. But welcome, Senior Director of Recruitment for New York City Public Schools, Chimere Stevens. What's going on, brother?
What's going on, Rel? Thanks for having me, my guy.
Nah, no problem, man. Like, we've been in the city, everything, like from the beginnings, like really from the beginnings. Like, I think a lot of people don't know. But I'm gonna ask you right off the bat, because I was always curious too, because we had the same upbringing growing up. But what was it like going to Catholic school and being from the hood? Because I know your travel was a little longer than mine.
Yo, for sure. Happy to jump into that. Yeah, I grew up on the west side of the Bronx, Cedric houses. And my mom used to throw me, my older sister, my brother on the 35 bus. Like, we knew the bus driver. Like, that's how, like, you know what I'm saying? She had to work. She was teaching. And so she would put us on the bus. We would sit right in those first 3 seats up front with the driver. And the ride across from there all the way to like 167 and like Boston Road, like Franklin Ave, probably was about 45 minutes. It felt so long when we were younger. And then, it was going to, even though being from the Bronx, you know how it is. Every block neighborhood has its own culture. So we didn't know a lot of people in that neighborhood as well. But then, like, when we got into the school, as you know, it being like a performing arts school and a Catholic school and like having so many resources, it was like once you were in the building and on that campus, it just felt like home. But at the same time, for me, it was wild because it was like I was coming from the projects from across town where like most of my friends weren't even going to school. I would see them as I was leaving school. But when I came back to the block, and it was just like, it almost was like, I always tell people I lived in like 2 different worlds, man. It was like coming from poverty and coming from the hood, having a uniform, going across town, going to this really dope school, having like access and opportunity. And then I'd come back to the block and it was like, you know what I mean? It was almost like Superman and Clark Kent, like taking off the uniform, you know what I'm saying? I'm putting on my ball gear, going to chill. But I just remember growing up and just at the time as a younger kid, just trying to make sense of the fact that like, man, like I'm here in this situation in the hood, but like my parents are trying to do better for me. So it was wild as like that upbringing, because it was so much of me of like exploration and just trying to figure out like, where I stood. Was I part of like the haves, the have-nots, you know what I'm saying? And so that's what it was like, man, like real talk, like just going through that, having that childhood. And I realized that, man, like though we lived in poverty, like, my mom and my dad, they worked their butts off, man. I try to like provide better for us. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, I don't think people realize like the struggles we had growing up to do that. Like, because we grew up in an era where we had these uniforms on and they weren't looked upon the same way they might be looked upon.
We was targets, man.
Every day, bro. Like, and it's crazy because you look at it like from where I'm from, where you from, we was targets leaving school all the way to the time we got home from school.
It's a fact. Yep.
Like, I had to walk, I walked home with William and all of them. And so it was like a little different, but it still didn't matter because we had uniforms on. So it was like, and then, we at the age where we were going through puberty and everything, so uniforms ain't fitting like they was when we first started.
That's a fact.
You had to get on the bus, and and imagine how many different hoods you went through just taking that one bus home.
Yo, and the other thing too is crazy is like going to Catholic school, like to your point with the uniform, you would find little things to do to try to not make yourself a target. So I don't know if you remember, we would try to after school take the shoes off, throw on some sneakers, you know what I'm saying? Like loosen up the tie a little bit.
Put the jacket on backwards,
like inside out. You know what I'm saying? And try to like do little things, but nah, for sure it was like. And then you had what projects were down there, down the block. You had like over on Webster and like
Yeah, that's what I was
Washington
from.
and and so you know what I mean. Again, like the kids who were from the neighborhood, you know what I mean. They sniffed us out. They were like, nah, these kids, you know what I'm saying. They got on uniforms. They kind of knew. And then for me going back home, you know, at that time, you know, it'd be like an hour because of the traffic. I went through so many different neighborhoods. Like even when we hit like 167 and like that, like Teller Ave, that was like mad Latino kids and Spanish dudes, and like every bus ride, it was like, yo, bro, you had to adjust every stop to be able to just like survive. But then also, you know, you learn how to adapt. That's one of the things I feel like all of us growing up in the Bronx, man, you learn how to adapt. So it's like you build those relationships. So try to get cool with people. And for me, being able to play basketball at that time, you know, we played some neighboring schools. So you sometimes would see somebody that you knew and try to like pull on that, hoping that, you know what I'm saying, that'll help you like navigate that scene and those spaces, you know what I'm saying? So that was a lot of it, you know.
So let's dive into public school. Well, I'll give somebody a little tidbit about you and I. I just, like I told you before we went on there, a lot of people might know, but then a lot of people probably don't know. We actually started elementary school with one set of last names and kind of went through life and navigated with a different last name. Like it's crazy because like when we connected years later, and I was just like, wait, hold up, that's not the same last name.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I get it. I was like, I know the feeling. Like I started off 8th grade with one last name and graduated 8th grade with a second last name. Like it's crazy.
Yep.
But like, so what was it like? Was there a big transition for you with that in terms of the last name change?
Yeah, because again, like being a black young man, like again, growing up in poverty, growing up in the Bronx, again, identity. And I know this now as a dad and like working with young people and raising a son, just trying to figure out your identity. So much of my youth was just trying to figure out like, yo, who I am, who am I? You know what I'm saying? And so crazy story, right? Now that we're years beyond that, my mom and my dad both, like we were a blended family. So my mom and my dad both were married before. And then again, trying to provide opportunity and access for your kids. When I entered in St. Augustine as a student to try to get like reduced tuition, you know what I'm saying? My mom at the time and my dad, they weren't like legally married. So my mom still had the last name of her previous husband, which was Sampson. And we just kind of all took on that last name, my siblings and I. Why, I'm not sure. I think also too, they weren't legally married, but then also like so many parents, right, trying to navigate these spaces, you know, my mom presented as like a single mom, even though her and my dad were like, they weren't married, but living together to be able to try to get like free or reduced tuition, you know what I'm saying? And so that really was like the basis of it, to be honest with you, was really trying to, you know what I'm saying, trying to navigate those spaces as a mom who, you know what I mean, had three kids in this Catholic school, you know what I'm saying, working and trying to figure that out. So that was like it. And then like later on, what happened was when we got to high school, my parents actually, it was crazy. They actually got married, like legitimately got married. And so I remember them having that convo about, you know, just making sure that we, you know, we took on the last name of our actual biological dad who was there and like in our lives and like in the home. But during those earlier years, you know what I mean, they were trying to figure out how do we navigate paying this tuition for 3 kids in Catholic school. And so I mean, my mom was a single mom for the purposes of that. And then it switched over when I was in high school. Yes. But I remember being like, yo, what? Why I got this dude's last name? That's like not my dad, but my 2 older brothers who were also living in the apartment with us were from my mom's previous marriage. So we would chill with it. But as you get older and things like that, I started to understand like why she made those decisions and like how she was trying to be strategic, you know what I'm saying, again, to try to provide for her kids.
Absolutely. I don't think people realize how much the sacrifices our parents did for us going to Catholic school, because Catholic school wasn't cheap. I mean, it's not cheap now, but it wasn't cheap back then by the standards it was back then either.
Man, I don't know. Like, again, I got 2 boys and they're nearing that age, right? 5th grade and 7th. And I'm looking at tuition and I really don't know. I don't know how my mom, you know what I'm saying, did that for 3 kids. That's wild. I guess, you know, again, I guess it was the last name fix.
Look, something had to help, right? So let me ask you, how did being in St. Augustine impact you?
Man, let me tell you, man, like if that school existed today, even I live in New Jersey now, Teaneck and Bergen County, I would send my kids there, bro. Because again, you had kids from all 5 boroughs coming to this one, like all like convening at this one Catholic school in the Bronx, right? Like in this one building. But I think what it did for me more than anything else is like, so you had to play an instrument from, you know what I mean, from very young. So you either acting, you were playing an instrument from like 5th grade on. That was like the big thing. That was like the rite of passage. You could get into like the junior jazz band. And then when you hit middle school, you can get into the jazz band. And then we did these, like, I think it was like spring and like winter concerts. But more so than anything else, I think what it did is it gave me like, first of all, provided community, because we were all spending so much time together, rehearsing and academically working together and like socially connecting. And so that sense of like community, but with a purpose, right? So we were putting on these performances, but they were more than performances. They really became like a culmination of like our community, our relationships, like it's so much of our of like who we became. Like it gave me a voice. It allowed me to feel comfortable standing in front of crowds. And so many kids, even at the time, they were donors who like helped, and sponsors who sponsored kids. So they would have like lunches or dinners for like sponsors, again, folks who were more well off, who didn't look like us, who didn't come from our neighborhoods, but we were put in those same rooms. And it wasn't like, here we are showcasing these like Black and brown kids. It was like, no, we want to empower you guys and give you a sense of like identity and purpose. And so, man, like so much of like what I do now, standing up in front of crowds, whether it's hosting, whether it's speaking to teachers. I just spoke at a conference last week for about 1,000 new teachers at Lehman College in the Bronx. And, I got up on stage, and it's easy, because we were doing that in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And so I think that's a big part of it, man. A big part of it is like confidence, public speaking, community, identity, and just being confident in who you are and comfortable in your own skin. I think was so much of that. You know what I'm saying? So
Absolutely. So what was your biggest transition from leaving St. Augustine to going to high school?
So this is a crazy story. I don't know if a lot of people know. Is I didn't know what high school was going to be like. I went to all boys high school, went to All Hallows, again in the Bronx as well. But the crazy thing was, again, community. We kind of like in these spaces to thrive, survive, sort of navigate. You pull on like what's familiar to you. So I don't know if you remember, we had a homeroom teacher, a dude named Mr. Regan. Who was a grade teacher. I don't know if you realize he was my freshman homeroom teacher when I went to high school.
Oh, wow.
And also so I played basketball and soccer at All Hallows. He was the assistant basketball coach and the head soccer coach. Now the crazy story is I didn't care for soccer, but what they did was, because the soccer season is before basketball's winter, soccer's in the fall, they made all of us play soccer. So by default, he became my soccer coach. So you had a bunch of basketball dudes playing soccer in the fall. But again, it made the transition a little easier because I knew him. I kind of had familiarity with him from coming from middle school. And then also I instantly jumped into community at All Hallows, which is an all boys school, as I mentioned, because I had like teammates that I connected with. So the transition from that was really easy. And then also, again, coming from St. Augustine, I just, you know what I mean? Like when you're in those spaces where you feel empowered and like, in all the things that I mentioned, I came in just already just feeling like, like we've done so much and accomplished so much from like 5th grade to 8th that, I really felt like the transition was, you know what I mean? Was really easy,
Yeah, that's dope though, because like you get to high school, you're like, damn, I don't know anybody.
Yep.
And then you see him, and it's like, oh wait, like he graduated with you.
Word, that's a fact. Yeah, that's a fact. So that was easy. Like it was served as like a really cool bridge. You know what I'm saying? Like ease into that high school space.
So what age did you start to feel like you became real comfortable in your own skin?
It's a great question. I would say probably 14, my freshman year of high school. I started feeling it was two inflection points. So the first one was for whatever reason around like that Christmas time, Christmas break. In my freshman year, I turned 14, and I had an opportunity to be able to go. I flew across the country for a program through the school to UCLA. I think that might have been my first time on the West Coast. Might have been my first time on a plane. And I remember we got to like a leadership it was leadership youth summit, youth leadership conference where like different schools sent people from around the country. And I remember we were sitting in UCLA. I had again known UCLA only from like basketball and like TV. The campus, if anyone's ever been on that campus, is ridiculous. I mean, it's so huge. You take buses across to classes, but it was like 50 kids who were like ambassadors, but from around the country, white, Asian, Latin. I mean, and I remember being there and feeling initially like, yo, I thought I was kind of the man in my little space back in the Bronx, but now it's like the world kind of opened up and you realize all these different cultures. And so it was a 2-week like summer immersion program. I think I spent the first couple of days just kind of a little insecure, trying to figure out my place and like where I stand. And then I was like, you know what, I'm just going to be myself, you know what I'm saying? Because up until that point in all those other spaces, whether it's middle school, high school, you know, that's again, that going back to that foundation, that's what they taught us, to be confident and comfortable in like who you are. And so I remember just approaching it like that, not trying to be somebody I wasn't. And the friendships kind of followed from there. Some that I still have to this day. And that was back in, I mean, we're talking 20 plus years ago, you know what I'm saying? Back in like 2000. And so that was probably that point where I was like, yo, you know what? Like, I'm really starting to feel comfortable in who I'm becoming and the person that I am. And then the second one was my junior year. Again, another leadership opportunity. And I had the opportunity to travel to Russia, believe it or not. I went to Moscow, and I was there for like the summer. So like June, July, and August.
How was that experience?
And that was before all of the craziness of the world right now.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
It was summertime in Moscow was amazing, man. It was amazing. And we were there building an orphanage for students. And so we lived in the orphanage for a little bit after it was constructed and stayed with students. And I remember, again, now when I came back, because I was still living in the projects, when I came back to the projects, when I came back to the Bronx, yo, I just had this like global mindset. It was like you couldn't really tell me anything at that point, because I had, again, friendships not just across the country, but now internationally, and again, like embracing me and for who I was, and I wasn't ashamed of being like from the projects and being from the Bronx. It was like, you know, we shared stories where I had friends from the Midwest who were like, yo, what is it like? You know what I'm saying? Yo, do you see rappers every day? Do you see like not every day? I'm like, nah, like don't fall for the okie doke that you see.
Yeah, word.
But also I started to be like proud and celebrate, like, yo, this is my story. You know what I'm saying? This is where I come from, and you know, and been able to make it out of that. And so those are like the 2 points where, you know what I'm saying, I would say probably around that like 14-year age, and then probably like 17, you know what I'm saying, was big for me.
Okay. So how did you end up with the senior director of recruitment?
Yeah. So I would tell anybody that's listening to this, man, like one of the biggest, these are like 3 things I live by. One is, you know, to work hard in anything that you're doing, whether it's a sport, whether it's an instrument, like work hard, because your reputation and your hard work will precede you. So that's first and foremost. And the second thing I always say is treat people with like the utmost respect, man. And not as a means to like gain something, but just genuinely like, yo, whoever you are as a person, like being a good person. And because you never know, right? So fast forward, what ended up happening was I was working at a charter school in the South Ward of Newark, New Jersey, and they actually paid for me to go to attend a leadership fellowship at Princeton University. And so I was in this fellowship through Princeton, and there were maybe like 4 or 5 of us who were like African American, and it was a young woman in the cohort, and her and I became like really, really good friends, and we just stayed in contact. I was working in a nonprofit space in New York City, And yo, she just hit me up one day. It was like, yo, on email, like, yo, Chimere, New York City Public Schools, we're hiring. She's now the deputy executive director here at New York City Public Schools, and she was like, we're starting this. We have an opening, in recruitment. And I was like, nah, I'm comfortable where I'm at. I'm living in Jersey. I'm working in New Jersey. I don't really think I want to be on the New York scene. And she was like, we're starting this program called NYC Men Teach through the mayor's office to recruit more males of color. And so I was like, yo, I'm interested. Sign me up. So I ended up interviewing, and I got the position through NYC Men Teach. I was working as a program manager. So my thing was really just going out, trying to find more men of color who wanted to become teachers. But bro, again, working hard, being in this space. I started as a program manager. I became associate director. I became director, and now senior director, all in the 10 years I've been here. And like, again, I'd say every single time that I leveled up in one of those positions, that was like a $10,000 increase, $15,000 increase. You know what I'm saying? And I started at like, as a program manager at like $75,000. So it was like, but I knew, again, like all those spaces that I've been in, and I'm like, yo, I work hard, treat people with respect, and kind of let those relationships and the work do the talking for itself. And so now, I have the opportunity to serve as the senior director for New York City Public Schools, and the program that I was hired into, NYC Men Teach, as a program manager, now leading that whole initiative through CUNY and the mayor's office. So it's wild, man, in like 10 short years. But that's been my approach, man. Just like really, again, like I said, working hard, no job beneath me, like rolling up my sleeves and working hard. And then also just treating everyone from the executive director to the custodian the same way, you know what I'm saying, with the same level of respect,
That's what's up. I think a lot of people also need to understand too that what comes with the pay increase, like you said, also comes with the hard work. So although you see the money increase, you got to understand all the hard work that came with that to get you to where you at to this point.
Yep. And I say another thing about this too, like dropping gems on folks trying to navigate those spaces, especially people of color trying to navigate those spaces, is initially, like when you're trying to like advance in your career, so much of it is you as an individual performer, right? Showing up on time, not calling out, making excuses, like being available. Like I think they say that, right? Like your best, like availability is like it's like your best thing. Like sometimes just being available, being in a space, being prepared. But then what happens is as you sort of climb the corporate ladder, it shifts from you being an individual, like a really strong individual performer, to then learning how to manage people, and then to like not replicate yourself, but to create other leaders and create that mindset in people who going to show up and work hard and treat people with respect. And so much of that is now going from an individual performer to now how do you create a culture where other people you're able to cultivate other people in that space where they themselves are able to become leaders, right? Like creating other leaders, not creating many miniature versions of yourself. So again, going back to what I said, like even at St. Augustine, they taught us so much about relationships and working with people. When you're in a band, it's one sound, right? Like 20 different instrumentalists, but like one sound. And so many of those principles, man, it's crazy. Again, even 25 plus years later, as a senior manager, senior director, like that I apply, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, yo, showing people that, we all trying to get it, but at the same time, like, similar to a team, right? Like or a band, like when everybody's doing their part, everyone looks good. Like it sounds good, you know what I'm saying? And that's how folks progress, you know what I mean? So much of that shift is that piece.
Absolutely. So where did the beginning of NYC Men Teach come from?
Yeah, so that's a dope story in and of itself too. So there's a big national organization. It was started by former President Barack Obama, and one of the biggest, like, can I say, he was Steph Curry, essentially, was like one of the biggest promoters of it. It's called My Brother's Keeper. So My Brother's Keeper started a number of years ago, and they had those programs where they gave funding to like some of the largest cities to basically provide opportunities and access for young men and boys of color. So what happened was back in 2015, they ended up starting a My Brother's Keeper chapter in New York City. But they coded it under what they call a Young Men's Initiative out of the mayor's office. So you could Google this. If you Google Young Men's Initiative still comes up. They have like a portfolio of like 10 different programs. But in 2015, the then mayor, Bill de Blasio, got up and was like, yo, we're going to put 1,000 men of color in the classroom by 2018. And so that was a great announcement. The only problem is when he said that, he ain't tell nobody. So people were like, wait, what? So that's when I got hired in 2016, me and a bunch of other folks. And essentially the whole thing, the reason why we needed more men of color is at the time, we had 75,000 teachers throughout the 5 boroughs of New York City, but only 8.5% of them identified as male educators of color. Not Black men, just male educators of color. So that's Black, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American, right? Only 8.5% identified. And so that was really like our biggest push back in 2016. So fast forward, we ended up meeting that goal a year early. We met it in 2017. We hired 1,300 men of color into New York City public schools. And then the rest is history. Since 2016, I think we've been directly responsible for over 5,000 like men of color who've been hired to New York City public schools. All because we know, that 85% of the 1 million students in New York City identify as students of color, and like 43% identify as boys of color. So the data just tells us that when students have teachers that look like them, there's so many like benefits to it. Them going to college, them making money, eating into that economic gap. So like that's really the science and the data behind like it, not just getting more bodies in the classroom or more like diversity, but understanding that the diversity is directly connected to like social and emotional benefits for like young people, and then also academic gains. You know what I'm saying? So
Absolutely.
Just representation. You know what I mean? Having them see people like that.
So in your opinion, in the years that you've been doing it, what has probably been the easiest thing about it, and probably what's been the most difficult thing about it?
Yeah, so I'd say the easiest thing is that there isn't a shortage of men of color who want to teach and who want to give back. Like when you and I talk about our experiences and like growing up the way we did and going to Catholic school, like, yo, we saw what access and opportunity did for us. And there's so many other guys like us who are like, yo, sign me up. Like, I want to teach. I want to be a paraprofessional. I want to be a coach, whatever. Like, I just want to impact young minds and young lives. And so that's the easiest part. The hardest part is that whenever there's a problem like that, right? Like when you say, for example, I'm gonna break this down to you. When you say that there's 75,000 teachers, but only 7,000 of them, right? Or less than 7,000 of them are men of color, right? If you go to Black men, that number drops down to like 4%, right? Why do we have that problem in the first place, right? Because sometimes we could think that like that's just by happenstance, but a lot of that stuff is intentional. You know what I'm saying? And so when you start to really do a deeper dive into why these things exist, right? So like we go back to 1954, Brown versus Board of Ed, right? Where we had schools where we segregate, like Little Rock 9, and we had schools that now we were busing like young Black kids into like white schools, right? To counter segregation. Seems like a great thing. It's harmless, right? You're like, yo, we want students to be able to have a rich education, right? The problem is segregation or desegregation didn't work for everyone, because those white schools, those white institutions, while they took Black students in those spaces, they didn't take Black teachers. But what a lot of folks don't know is like prior to that, there were Black schools with Black educators who taught Black kids, and they were thriving. And so we fast forward now where we still see this shortage of Black teachers of color in these spaces. And again, a lot of that goes back to looking at that space. And so the hardest part is right now, like even for example, I'll give you an example. To be able to get certified as a teacher in New York City, it's through the state. So you have to have a certain GPA for undergrad. A lot of men of color don't have the GPA requirement. Or just to get a bachelor's degree, you're looking at about 30, 40,000. I mean, a master's degree, what you need to teach, about 30, 40,000. Some guys don't have the 30, 40,000. So it's like the interest and the willingness is there, but there's a lot of these like barriers to entry. Also, like being able to pass tests, you have to pass these exams. And, it's not to say that I'll give you an example. To teach, you have to have a 3.0 GPA, right? A lot of guys, you know what I'm saying, were working like I was during college, may have a 2.5, a 2.3, right?
Mhm.
And for me, I'm not about watering down the profession because I understand how vital teachers are. But I don't think that having a high a 3.0 GPA is the only like requirement for being a dope teacher. I know a lot of dudes that went, I'm rocking a Harvard shirt right now. I know a lot of dudes that went to Harvard and had over 3.0s and they stink as teachers. You know what I'm saying? They should not be working with young people. So, you know what I'm saying? Just making sure that again, when we talk about opportunity and access, you know what I'm saying? There's dope dudes working in schools right now who are not certified or credentialed, but they got the respect and of the parents, of the students, of the community, highly respected dudes that, like, you know, we just got to figure out how to get them credentialed because their value to these school spaces in the community are like amazing. You know what I'm saying? So that's the hardest part. The hardest part is navigating some of the bureaucracy and red tape that has existed for generations, and some of it is intentional. You know what I'm saying?
So how do you navigate around that, like getting through the red tape to be able to get these guys to start teaching without
Yep.
without allowing them to also be discouraged at the discrepancies that they may have, because it's real easy to be like, yeah, I want to be a teacher, like you said, but at the same time, if you're telling them like, well, this is your requirements, this is what you need to do, it's real easy for them to just be like, yeah, I don't have that, or I'll probably never get that, so I'm just gonna try to find something else. So how do you stay on top of them in order to keep them focused to achieve the goal that they're trying to get to?
Yeah, let me give you an example. So I talked about the good stuff, right? And I said, yo, back in 2016, we saw 1,300 men of color become teachers in 1 year, right? It was supposed to be a 2-year thing. We got funding from the mayor's office. We did it in 1 year, right? 1,300 men is dope. We applaud that. What I didn't share is that there was about 500 men of color at that time who raised their hand, who, due to the barriers that I mentioned to you, were denied entry into the profession. And that was hard. So one of the biggest takeaways that we realized right from that moment, and that shifted everything for us back in 2018, was that if we really want to make sure that we have representation in our schools, the biggest takeaway is we got to start earlier. So earlier access and earlier introduction to the profession. So I'll give you an example. Right now, what we do is we work with, I told you we have the partnerships with CUNY, right? So we work with like the CUNY schools to be able to say, yo, can y'all help us out with two things? One, providing degrees for folks, undergraduate degrees and bachelor's degrees, so associate degrees at like little to no cost. Maybe we could find like funders to be able to offset that cost. So we've been able to do that. And then the second piece for that is also getting them to also see if they would be willing, how low they would be willing to go on the GPAs as well in these programs. Again, it's all relationships. Goes back to what I said, partnerships, how you treat people. Having a cohort of guys who might have a 2.5, but they've killed it in these programs now opens the door for people who will come after them in like these subsequent cohorts. So, for example, right now we have a high school to teacher program. So we pay for students to get their associate degrees at the colleges. And then, I mean, that's cost savings for families because an undergraduate degree right now, on average, it's like maybe $25,000-$30,000 for 4 years, right? Maybe more than that, depending on what school you go to. I know I went to Fordham University, man, they pushing like $40K a semester, right? But you know, for the high school students, if they are able to get an associate's degree through us for free, that's like $30,000 that, you know, a family saved. And then what we're also doing, the first entry into any school is a paraprofessional. That's like a teaching assistant. We're also giving free training to the high school students so that if they are like me, if they have to work while they're in college, they could serve as paraprofessionals. So they could go to school during or go work in a school during the day, take some classes in the evening or afternoon. Again, you know, so we got high school students. We now have 2 colleges. Shout out to Mega Everest College, York College, where now they're fully through funding, fully covering bachelor's degrees for dudes.
Dope.
We got Brooklyn College and City College and Hunter, who are paying for master's degree programs. So that's really, so that is taking care of some of the technical stuff, right? Like with having online classes so dudes could actually work, or if they have families, right? In terms of the time commitment and reducing the tuition. So that helps. And then what we're doing also is giving them like mentors. So like when they come into the profession, they have a mentor that's like checking on them twice a month, making sure that like socially and emotionally, like they're in a good space, that helping them out sometimes with like stipends, you know what I mean, where they could get some money to be able to like, in addition to them teaching in the profession, having like that. Remember I talked about like community. So we're creating that same sense of community and identity for them through like mentorship and wraparound supports for folks to be able to help them. So, last week, we took some guys to like a little outing, like just hanging out, chilling. Again, getting out of the four walls of the school, out of the classroom, and just building on that brotherhood. And that's been like a big thing, because now you have dudes that you can lean on as you're going through stuff. So that's like a lot of what we do. It's a different type of recruitment, where I'm just not trying to sell someone on becoming a teacher, but it's like, yo, I'm trying to help you understand your identity, who you are, so that in turn you could do that for these young people. But I'm also giving you a community of people in a safe space to be able to do that as you navigate that and figure it out for yourself.
That's dope. That's dope. So you being from a rough neighborhood in the Bronx, then to moving out to Jersey, having your own family, how important was it for you to give back?
Oh, 1,000%, man, 1,000%. Like, I mean, to me, I live by, this is something my mom always said to me. She said, yo, to who much is given, much is expected. You know what I'm saying? And the funny thing is, again, we wanted to stay in the city. It just was too expensive as we had kids. So
it happened.
Jersey was cheaper, but I'm still right there, right a couple of miles out. But giving back, because again, this goes back to what I was saying and why I always say, like, this isn't a job for me. This was like a calling to be able to do this. Is I saw mentors and folks in my life, and I'll share one example, who showed me that like these things were possible. And like, it's hard to become something if you don't see it. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so for me, I remember being a senior at All Hallows, and we had a guidance counselor, an academic advisor, and they would give like vouchers to the students to be able to get the applications waived for the college to apply. And I remember I told my guidance counselor, college counselor, whatever, I said, yo, I want to go to Fordham University. I live in the Bronx. I'm from the Bronx. Like, that's the school I really want to be at. And she was like, yo, it's a Caucasian woman. Said, I'm not giving you that voucher because you would never get into school. And so what I ended up doing was, it was crazy, right? So I ended up.
How deflating was that?
Man, it was, I was like 2 seconds away from really believing that and just settling for whatever schools they were trying to push me towards. But what I ended up doing was, I had a mentor at the time who, crazy enough, like, he's the principal now of the elementary school that he went to up in up on like Gun Hill Road. And he was taking grad classes at Fordham University. He said, yo, you want to go to that school? You know what? I'm gonna have you come sit through some of my grad classes. And the crazy thing was, I grew up in the Bronx on University, not too far from Fordham University, but I had never been on the campus. You know what I'm saying? You know how it is, it's gated. They kind of, it's in the Bronx, but it's not.
But it's like their own zip code, kind of.
Facts. And so I went on campus. It was, heavily like white. But again, I struggled with just like that imposter syndrome and like if I belong. But as he started letting me come to the classes and I was listening and I was hearing things, I was like, yo, like, I could really see myself here. Again, it's that seed that was planted, but the opportunity and the access. And so what I did was, without the support of my high school counselor, is I went and I interviewed for Fordham with at the time, he was the dean of undergraduate admissions, a guy named John Buckley. And so I interviewed with him on my own. I got a letter a few months later that said, hey, you've been waitlisted. You haven't been accepted into the school. And I was like, all right, cool. If nothing else, like I put myself out there, you know what I'm saying? But I also, being real with myself, I realized that my 4 years of high school, I didn't work as hard as I needed to, you know what I'm saying? So I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'm gonna go to this other school, which I did. I had another school, the College of Mount St. Vincent, and I ended up going there. And I was so determined to get out of there because I felt like I could do better. I had a 3.8 GPA my first semester, and I got a call from John Buckley. He was like, yo, Chimere, we just calling to follow up. It was other candidates who were applied who were more qualified than you, but we kept your application on file if you're interested in attending the school. And I was like, hell yeah. And I ended up 2 weeks later, I was sitting at a transfer student orientation at Fordham. That's where I ended up graduating from. myself and John Buckley are friends to this day. He's now the vice president of admissions at Fordham. And he says, what we have a pact together where any student that I feel, right, is a student that like could do that work and could graduate, but doesn't quite meet the criteria, he'll take them into the school if they apply.
Nice.
And so we've helped a number of students, you know what I'm saying, get into the school and graduate from the school, which has been dope. That's part of the giving back. But also, again, giving back is important because it's not just like a nice gesture. You really are, for me, I'm showing folks that like you can come from these spaces, navigate these spaces, you belong there, you have the brilliance and the genius, you know what I'm saying? And you can level up and understanding that you belong there. So that's big, you know what I'm saying, for me, is to make sure. And even now that as I have kids, I'm bringing them to the city for everything. You know what I'm saying? I'm taking them to those same neighborhoods where I grew up, so that they understand like, yo, and unfortunately, like that's how the world is set up in this country, right? It's like, you know, you got folks living in poverty, you got folks living in Alpine, New Jersey, you know what I'm saying? They know better than one another, but you know what I mean? Like that socioeconomic piece is a big driver, you know what I'm saying, in the country that we live in. And so just for my kids and also just students understanding how they navigate that and are aware of like what's happening and how that politics and all of that stuff plays into, you know what I mean? Like the day to day, you know, and not overlooking that, you know what I'm saying?
Do you ever, just hearing the last few things you just said, do you ever sit back and just take a deep breath and realize what you did for a lot of Black men? Like, look at what you just said. Like, your hard work and what you did at Fordham University and the relationship you built now made it easier for other guys to be able to get into Fordham and, you know, through admissions based on the relationships that you made. Like, do you ever sit back and really just sit back and think about you kind of trailblazed the way?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just having this conversation with somebody. It's like I do and I don't. So I don't in the sense of like, I feel like it's so much more to do, like in my head, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I think that's what keeps me humble and keeps me continuing to work because, you know, I could walk into a school right now because I frequent schools, right? And I could walk into a school right now in the Bronx in that same neighborhood where you and I went, right? I go to like CS 55, that's over there on St. Paul's Ave,
Right across the street from me.
Yeah, and like I made my boys a principal there. They're doing good work, killing it. My boy Luis Torres, but at the same time, I see still some youth, right, like who are coming in, right, who are there where I was, just starting, trying to. It's like the cycle still continues. So it's like the work is never ending, and so I think that's the part that keeps me going, is because I'm like, yo, none of us are like really free until like all of us are free of like poverty and free of like those things that like the crime and the stuff that plague us, you know what I'm saying? So I think that's what keeps me humble and keeps me going. I think that the other part though, sometimes where I have those moments where I'm like, man, that's dope, is when I get those text messages or when I get those emails, you know what I'm saying, from someone who goes, yo, you might not remember this, but like you were the dude that like, yo, you made it so that like I just graduated. I'm teaching now. I didn't pay for college. And you sent that email to the dean over at Brooklyn College. And I'm like, yo, that's dope. Like to have that level of influence where now I have a voice and a seat at the table to be able to influence it. Like those are the things that I'm like, man, it confirms for me that I'm doing like God's work and I'm in the right place. You know what I'm saying? So those are kind of things that like keep me balanced. It's like the success stories. And teachers now, I walk into a school and they're teaching their class and they're working with young people, and I had a hand in like helping to launch their careers. But then at the same time too, like seeing still some of the younger cats that's coming up and understanding that, all right, cool, they're gonna need mentors. They're gonna need somebody to show them that there's stuff beyond the block, just like somebody did, you know what I'm saying, for me. So that's what I would say.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna close it out. I got 2 questions before I ask you the final question.
All right.
How do you manage with the busy life that you have? This is the first one. How do you manage with the busy life that you have, manage to still be accessible to like anybody who needs your advice, like, you know, up and coming teachers or existing teachers or, you know, like young students? And then two, the second part of the question is, how do you find a way to still balance life? Because you're married, one, then you have two kids who are like, I see you all the time. You're everywhere they
Yeah.
are. So how do you manage to balance those things in life?
Yeah. So I'll answer the second question first in terms of the balance piece. Is that there's a thing, if anybody listening, if you can Google this, if you're fortunate enough to be able to experience this, it's called the hedgehog concept. And the hedgehog concept basically talks about finding something that you're super passionate about, finding something that's going to pay you well, and then finding something that like you are the best at, that like nobody else can do this thing like you. And this guy basically says, if you could find like the sweet spot between those three things, then like you'll make money, you'll feel like you're having impact, and you'll be doing what you love, right? And so for me, I feel like the way that I balance it is so much of, and I filter a lot too, right? Like when people ask me to do stuff or things come along, so much of what I'm doing are all kind of interconnected and kind of streamlined all in the same thing. So like from our St. Augustine days, I love music. So I'm in studio sometimes supporting like younger artists or helping with production or like things like that. But then we're doing that with students as well. So we have students sometimes that we're connected. For my two sons, right? It's sports, it's music, it's faith, it's education. Same thing with the missus, with my wife. I think it also helps that like I've married someone now. It's been since 2006, so coming up on like 20, almost 20 years, who also is in that same space, that creative space, right? Loves to give back, loves education, and is into hard work and kind of respects that balance. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is like when you are trying to filter, when your time is limited, because that's the greatest resource, you have to filter and say like, yo, what is my ultimate goal, right? My ultimate goal, again, is for people to be able to take back their communities, be active in their community, do what they love, right? Like just like it's all about community organizing and community betterment. And I understand that education is a part of that. The arts is a part of that. Faith, for whatever faith you believe in, is a part of that, right? And so when I'm thinking about who I collaborate with, where I go, how I spend my time, those are the filters. So there's a through line in all of that, and there's an alignment with it. You get what I'm saying? Whereas before, I was so excited, I might be like trying to be here and trying to be there. And now it's like, yo, you don't really need to be, when you have clear goals, you don't need to be everywhere. You just need to be like there's certain places you need to be. There's certain people you need to connect with. And so I think that's how I do that. And I think in terms of the balancing of the family, is being intentional. That's a lot of calendaring, scheduling, making sure, you know what I mean, that I spend that time with the missus, even if it's like, yo, this once a month, this is our protected, rivaled like hangout time. You know what I'm saying? Like making sure that time is sacred, is protecting, that we chilling. And with the kids too, trying to get to their games or things like that. So that's that. In terms of the other, like how do I make myself accessible? I think
How do you manage to stay accessible, like despite being so busy?
Yeah, I think I always talk to folks like, this is something that I apply to myself, but I would also give this as a gem to people, right? Relationship building and networking are like paramount, right? To like your advancement, your career advancement, continuing to stay relevant, continuing to seek job opportunities. But it's not just networking where, yo, I'm gonna go pull up to a happy hour and go network with some dudes. Nah, like networking with a purpose. So like if I'm gonna go to a networking event, let's say with folks who are like funders for an education, who like ed tech dudes or whatever, again, similar to you with the space and the platform you have, I'm gonna do my research and make sure that like when I enter these spaces, it's mutually beneficial for the people that I'm networking with as well. So I'm going in having done my homework. I'm going in adding value to those spaces so that like, you know, we had a meeting last week with Up NYC is Fat Joe's people. They brought a store, I think, on 3rd Ave. I'm familiar with the one in the Heights. And they said, yo, we want to do more youth programming for young people through the schools. And so my boy, who's the principal, he's cool with them, Torres in the Bronx, was like, yo, I'm gonna bring my boy Chimere to this space. So again, I'm staying accessible, being in those spaces, just understanding, again, it's that filter, right? It's fashion, it's community, it's the arts, right? It's education, all in those spaces. And so I think that's what it's like, you have to also to be intentional in and mutually beneficial in your networking, but you also got to start to shrink the space so that it's not just, yo, I'm gonna cast this wide net and see. Nah, like what am I trying to accomplish, and who are the people that are in those spaces already, and how do I align myself with them? Again, not on some agenda-based stuff, but making sure that like it's authentic and genuine, and that I'm adding mutual value in those spaces. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how I do it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So once again, I just want to thank you for this great interview, because
Wow,
this was
man, it's
awesome,
been
man.
dope.
Man, nah, I appreciate it. Definitely. You dropped a lot of jewels, and I hope a lot of people pay attention to everything you said, because it was very beneficial. But I'm gonna ask you this last question before we close out. I ask
Yeah.
everybody. So you being, the age that you are now, you being, all the busy stuff you got going on, the kids, the wife, the job, everything. What would you now, at your older self, tell your younger self?
Yeah, I would say find things that you love, right? Um, and again, just explore. Like, the earlier access to stuff, the better. You know what ends up happening, and I see this a lot of times, even with older people who come in who are either seeking employment or looking for jobs, or I'm trying to help. Sometimes we could be generalists, where like, which is cool, right? We have like all these um things, and that's cool for like the diversity of like our experiences and our background knowledge. But I think the earlier you could find like, yo, these are the top 3 things or the top 5 things that I'm really passionate about, and then exploring like what those spaces are like. So like if someone is really interested in sports broadcasting, right? And you're like, yo, and people tell you, a lot of times you'll know also what you're dope at, even at a young age, because you'll hear it as a consistent theme from people. They'll be like, you really are like a mind when it comes to like sports broadcasting. And so I would tell myself more like looking up, what do those spaces look like? Whether those are camps or whether those are seminars or webinars or Zoom things, and like just being in those spaces and just learning, you know what I'm saying? Because I think I learned by kind of trial by fire, just going through stuff, and I
Mm-hmm.
landed here in the relationships. But I do see, and I do feel like in the world we live in today, you know what I mean, to be able to really, if you can, tap into like what your passion is, what you've been called to do, and your purpose earlier, you spend a lot less time like working against the grain. There's things that we do that are dope, right, and they have impact. But when it's not your passion thing, you're like, you'll do a little bit of it and you're like, yo, I'm drained, I'm exhausted. But then when you find like something that you really are called, bro, I could stay in a studio with young people creating and making music. And again, that's identity work, and them putting their who they are through the music. I'll stay in there 12, 14 hours and it'll feel like an hour. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would say. It's like, find what you're passionate about. If you don't know, listen to the people around you who you respect, who are telling you what you're dope at. And I would just say explore a lot of those things earlier, rather than just what everybody else is doing. Don't be afraid to go against the grain. Yes, everybody loves sports. Everybody loves music. Those are dope things. But there's like even subgroups within those, and just finding out and tapping into like what you've been called to and put here to do. That's what I'd say.
All right, thank you, man. I appreciate this interview. Where would people be able to find you if they needed to reach out and ask you any
Yeah,
questions?
for sure. On IG, it's at Chase Ennis. So that's ChaseInnis. Funny story, Chase Ennis. So I made I'm signed to ASCAP and BMI as like a songwriter producer. That's how I paid a lot of my way through college by doing music production. So
Nice. Nice.
that's my registered name. So Chase Ennis on Instagram, or Chimere Stevens, what you see here, which is my actual name. That's on LinkedIn, Facebook. Yeah, so please reach out. Anything I could do to help, man. Like I said, I feel like I've been given so much, so I'm always down to be able to help out in any way possible.
I appreciate that, man. If you got anybody who who wants to put their their journey out there, reach out to me. Let me know. I'll gladly give them a platform so they can talk about whatever it is they need to talk about. That,
brother.
Nah,
what
definitely.
It's dope, man. I really appreciate it, man.
Nah, thanks, man. I appreciate it, man. Take care, man, and I enjoy it. Thanks for this interview again. Appreciate it.
No doubt. Peace.
All right, man.
Keep it raw, uncut, sit down, talk it out, come together, we as men don't have to shoot it out.